Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing the nonverbal communication of two different people at kind of the same time. That'll be Buster and Alec Murdaugh. You'll see. Let's go ahead and roll the intro. Okay, so this is not my first video in this series on the Murdaugh case. If you would like to be able to catch up as to where we are, I suggest you go and check out the other videos. First, you'll see the backstories and everything that goes into what we're looking at here. So today we're going to go ahead and do a little bit more analysis on father and son here. Let's begin.
Don't just say what it is, please.
It's a picture of my mom and my dad and I on a boat.
Is that Memorial Day weekend?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we moved Defendant's Exhibit 123 in the evidence.
No objection. It's admitted.
Is this the photo, Buster?
Yes, sir.
And then I believe this same weekend there was a birthday party or cookout. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here and just make a note about some of Buster's nonverbal communication. Alec, during that time, didn't do too much. There wasn't too much to see. Buster did a very, very substantial manipulator up here to his earlobe, and that's not necessarily hinging around anything, but I did want to make note that that does pop up, and it's centered around this picture, I guess. So if that does pop up again and again, perhaps it's something like a tell of his, but we'll find out. Let's continue watching.
Or cookout, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Doug, if you could play Defense Exhibit 61, please. It's in evidence.
Going to go ahead and pause again here. Buster is continuing a large amount of facial manipulators in there, and that does have me a little bit curious, centered around this boating accident. What is causing him to have this much anxiety or this much agitation centered around this, that it causes all of these manipulators to pop up? So far, still, Alec is doing very little. Let's watch.
Let's take a look at that.
So much. Hey! Thank you, babe.
And was that your mom make a cake for your dad?
Yes, sir.
And that was a group of friends. When's your dad's birthday? Do you know the exact date? It's not a test. You just say you don't know if you don't know.
No, I don't know the exact date.
It's around Memorial Day?
That's right.
Okay.
27th, maybe.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here and just make a couple notes. So, Alec's reaction to that clip, initially when it started, he flashed what seemed to be surprise mixed then with a dismissal, a looking off to the side and an eye blocking. But then afterwards, we're seeing this very substantial facial manipulator. It's hard to see if he was like maybe trying to play off wiping away tears or something along those lines. But that did pop up right after that video. And so we're seeing perhaps a level of emotional display from Alec in regards to that. But if you look closely at like his eyes, we're not seeing any actual tears. So maybe this was a display, perhaps a little bit of a forced display, a low level of manipulation, possibly, difficult to say. Then switched around to this interesting detail that Buster does not remember his dad's birthday. And that's not necessarily out of the norm, but it is still something to just note about the relationship between the two. Perhaps there wasn't a level of personable relationship. It's difficult to say, just not knowing a birthday. It's fascinating. Let's keep watching.
Then the following weekend, there was a baseball tournament in Columbia, correct?
Yep. Yes, sir.
Tell the jury about that weekend. What happened there?
That was the weekend. South Carolina was hosting a regional baseball tournament, and me, my mom, my dad, and my girlfriend went to the baseball games.
And where was the game?
Columbia.
And it was a super regional or
Regional.
a regional?
Yes, sir.
And what What days of that weekend did you go to the game?
Saturday and Sunday.
Did your mom and dad stay in Columbia that weekend?
They did.
Or they stayed on Saturday night?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you, did y'all tailgate with them on Saturday or Sunday?
Yes, sir. We did.
And was it a...
I'm going to go ahead and pause here again. So far, I'm not seeing anything that's pushing me towards a direction of deceit from Buster. He seems to be fairly synchronized. And so far, these questions don't seem to be implicating on very many levels, if any. So that would also make sense that he's displaying synchronized nonverbal communication. Along with that, if we're looking over there at Alec during this time, he also goes and grabs a he goes and grabs a Kleenex and goes to try to wipe away some tears and whatnot. But again, I'm still having difficulty seeing the actual tears that he might be wiping away. Perhaps it is because of the video resolution. It's not the most amazing. It still seems as though the emotion that he's trying to force feels, forced. And then on the same kind of vein as that, we're not seeing any form of emotional display from Buster in this. So I'm not really sure that we're seeing too much emotional attachment to this video that's being brought up here, but let's continue.
And was it a normal weekend?
It was.
Fun weekend?
Yes, sir.
And that Sunday would have been June the 6th, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then on June the 7th, we went through a host of...
Okay, so I want to go ahead and pause. Something around that date, there was a pretty substantial self-soothing gesture where running both hands along the thighs there like that. That is a sign of agitation. And then right afterwards, he had a pretty substantial internal mouth manipulator there where he was biting the inside of his mouth. And those are both signs of agitation. I'm curious as to why that might pop up around here. Again, I'm just trying to gather more data from Buster as we're continuing through this. And Alec is trying to remain as astutely blank as he can throughout this, which, I mean, considering his profession makes sense. Let's continue.
Host of number of telephone calls with you and your dad and mom leading up to 9:08, 9:10 on June 7th. Buster, when did you first find out that your mom and brother were murdered?
My dad called me. I can't remember the exact time, but it was later. And he called me on the phone. He asked me if I was sitting down. And I was like, yeah. And then he, sounded odd. And then he told me that my mom and brother had been shot.
And what'd you do?
Well, Brooklyn, my girlfriend, was with me, and I think she heard she could hear my conversation kind of over the phone. And so she just...
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here and make a note of the nonverbal communication that Alec is displaying. Again, we're seeing him pulling out what seems to be grieving. We're seeing the eyebrows pulling together and raising upwards, and we're seeing him try to dry these potential tears from his face. So that would make sense. That would be an emotional response that you might anticipate seeing in regards to this sort of instance had the people involved been fully innocent. But what I find fascinating is that Buster during this time has very little to no emotional display. Now, this could be for a number of reasons. No two people respond to trauma the same way, so perhaps he just shuts down and that's the reason for this. That is that possibility. I do find it interesting that while talking about this fairly traumatic experience in his life, there is no nonverbal reflection of the emotion behind that on his face. Let's just keep watching to see how these two play out.
For a minute, I was in shock. But eventually we got our stuff together and drove down to Moselle.
Do you remember what time you got to Moselle?
It was early in the morning, late in the morning. If we left around 10:30, 11, got there sometime probably around 2 o'clock in the morning.
And when you got there, did you see your dad?
Yes, sir.
What kind of condition was he in? What was his demeanor?
Yeah, his demeanor was, he was destroyed. He was heartbroken. I walked in the door and saw him and gave him a hug and just
I'm going to go ahead and pause here. This is a fascinating thing to be able to make note of, and I'm not sure as to why this is showing up here, but I want to make note of it. So during this time that Buster is describing how his dad was during this time, and he was destroyed, heartbroken, and all of this other stuff, I'm paying a lot of attention to Alec during this time, and if you look very closely, you could see him micro-nodding yes along with this. Now, perhaps this is because Buster is telling the truth, which we don't believe to be the case. He's been found guilty. So, if that's the case, and we know that Buster's not necessarily telling the truth here, then this could be a level of manipulation being done, again, by Alec. That soft, very small, very slight nodding of the head oftentimes goes unnoticed, but the effects still do actually take effect. So, there is that possibility of that popping up there. Also, we're seeing that Buster will occasionally check in with his dad as he's talking here, as we saw here, and that lets us know that he's at least aware of and wants to check in on the effect that his words are having on his dad. Now, whether or not that's because his dad has told him, hey, I want you to say these things, or what that is too difficult to say right here, but let's keep watching.
Just broken down.
Could he speak?
Not really.
Was he crying?
Yes, sir.
Who else was in the house? Do you remember?
Yeah. My girlfriend Brooklyn and I got there. Out in the driveway, my Uncle Randy and Uncle John were out there. Chris Wilson and Corey Fleming had just gotten there. They had pulled in behind us, and when I walked in, several of the partners were there. Ronnie Crosby was there, Lee Cope was there, Mark Ball was there, Austin Crosby was there, William Barnes, my buddy Nolan was there. And I'm sure I'm leaving some out, but that's
Sure.
what I remember.
And do you remember how long you stayed there?
Stayed there several hours, probably 3 or 4 hours, till about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
And where did you go?
And then we left Moselle and we went to Alameda.
When you say we, who are you talking about?
My girlfriend, my dad, and my Uncle John.
I know this seems kind of trivial, but what was your dad wearing when you first saw him?
I'm going to go ahead and pause here. So throughout this time while Buster is talking about this entire event, he maintains a fairly low eye direction there. So he's looking downwards and still moving around within that space. That can be an indicator of genuine recollection. It's difficult to say for sure. I would lean towards genuine recollection in that area. There are some things that pop up that do strike me as red flags and something that I would want to be able to keep in mind. Both the vocal stammerings and stutterings that do come in while recollecting there, that technically could also be explained by genuine recollection. But then we're also seeing that very, very substantial facial manipulator come in there as well. And so I'm trying to be able to juggle all of these different tells as we're moving forward to see if there's anything that does show up as a pattern from Buster during this. Again, I'm not getting too much substantially from Alec during this time. He seems to just be rather honed in on what Buster is saying, very attentive on that level, with an occasional attempt to show that he's grieving on some level as well. Let's keep watching.
Shorts, t-shirt.
Okay. And
Gonna go ahead and pause there. That shorts, t-shirt, and shaking of the head. No, I don't have any confidence in what Buster was saying there. I feel like perhaps maybe that was the general clothing, but he doesn't have confidence in what he's saying, so there's not a lot of confidence behind his words and his nonverbal communication either due to that. So something is up around that caused him that lack of confidence, something that needs to be questioned out. Let's see how that goes.
did you help him pack?
I did, yes, sir.
What did you do to help him pack?
Got his bag and went into the closet, grabbed some t-shirts, grabbed some shorts, grabbed toilet kit, put it in the bag and left.
Why were you doing the packing?
Something else seems off there. So one, I find it interesting that Buster is able to pack for his dad but doesn't know when his dad's birthday is. It seems as though like perhaps that level of intimate style of thing might be related, but that's neither here nor there. What I do find interesting is that he lists these things that he packs, and then he said, and then it left, and he trails off very, very, very softly at the end. There's no force behind his words. The pitch drops off, the tone drops off, everything drops off, and so that means that it wasn't as confident again. So something around there is, again, a red flag. So we're seeing a couple different little red flags pop up around what his dad's wearing and Buster's involvement in that. So I would want to be able to keep these in mind as we continue forward. Did Buster perhaps have something to do with these things, and so he prepared in some way? It's difficult to say. Let's watch.
Just trying to help him. He was so upset. We were all upset, but just trying to expedite the process of getting to Alameda.
When you went in to pack your dad, was there a T-shirt laying on the floor?
I couldn't remember.
Did you get shirts from above the?
I want to make note of something interesting that Buster has done verbally here. I couldn't remember. He has done this interesting tense phrasing before. This one seems to be a little bit out of the ordinary, because these are things that he has said that he has done, not that he wouldn't have done or couldn't have done or something like that. These are things that he said he has done. So instead of in this area saying, I don't remember what was in there, which would be the appropriate tensing, the appropriate grammar, he says, I couldn't remember, as if there were an aligned or parallel thing. Now, this can be an indicator that this is in an imagined or forced or fake, deceitful storyline, that he couldn't remember what had happened there. That might be an indicator that he does actually know what was there, and he does remember, and he's just possibly being deceitful about it. So that's another red flag here. We're seeing 3 around the clothing here. Let's keep watching.
Where did you get the T-shirts from?
Got them from the closet, and there's like wooden shelves up on the wall, and I was getting the T-shirts from there.
Were there a lot of T-shirts on the shelf?
Yes, sir.
Do you know whether or not one of the T-shirts fell on the floor when you were packing?
I don't know whether one of them fell on the floor or not, but certainly could have happened.
Okay, so I find that interesting, and it lets us know that Buster is very aware of what this line of questioning is going for. So says that he wanted to help, and then he starts adding these details as far as where he got the shirts from, and that there were these wooden shelves, and he got them off the wooden shelves. That extra detail, packing, is a red flag, except for what it's immediately followed by is further questioning. So it does indicate to me that Buster likely anticipated that further questioning to be able to help this area smooth over. So either 1, he's packed his response, and it could be a possible sign of deceit. Nobody asked what shelves they were on. Nobody probably even cared. I didn't personally think to myself, I wonder how Alex stores his clothing. Or Buster is anticipating where this line of questioning is going and trying to get details out ahead of time to be able to help mask a certain situation or instance. And it all seems to be dealing with this shirt. So we're seeing some interesting moves around the clothing. Let's keep watching.
When you got to Moselle, were you able to get some sleep?
No, sir.
Did you go back to Moselle the next morning?
Yes, sir.
And who went with you?
Me, my girlfriend Brooklyn, and my dad, and maybe John Marvin. I don't know if he was riding with us or already out there separately, but he was somewhere in the mix.
Do you remember roughly what time you got to Moselle?
I think we got there rather early. Nobody really slept, and about early in the morning, sun comes up. Just
did
go back.
During that part of the answer, he has a constant micro shake no in there. Now, I doubt that is a desynchronization. That would probably be related to the you wouldn't believe. It's still that no vein of nonverbal communication, but see that popping up in there. Just wanted to be able to make note that it is still showing up. It's fascinating to me the details that do and do not stick out in Buster's mind as he's recollecting various aspects of this, like being able to recollect where he got the shirts in the closet, not recollecting who was with. It still is not indicating that he is guilty or an accomplice in anything that has occurred here, but there are definitely just some areas that I want to make note of. So let's keep watching.
Did you take a shower and Brooklyn take a shower at Alameda, or did you do it over at Moselle?
No, sir. We slept tried to sleep at Alameda, and then we took everything back with us to Moselle, and we showered there.
Do you know where your dad took a shower that morning?
Yeah, Moselle.
And when you went back over,
Interesting. There was a little bit of a pitch fall off at the end of this, but it's not out of his normal patterning that we're hearing, where his dad took a shower. But then afterwards, he does a very substantial postural change. He does a lip compression, looks off to the side, increase in blinking. So there is that spike in nonverbal communication, which to me feels like there is a level of agitation, and then we're seeing the release of it there. And so for me, I have that question as to why that might be. It's difficult to answer from this little segment that we're working with, but it did pop up there around that shower instance as well. Let's continue watching.
in the morning, do you know what your dad was wearing? When you were traveling from Alameda back?
No, not specifically, but I know that, I know what I packed, so it could have been any of that. It's just athletic shorts and T-shirts and stuff.
Okay. And after you got to Moselle, and I guess just carrying the days forward, were you with your dad? Well, how often were you with your dad once you got back to Moselle on the 8th?
No, every day.
For how many days?
For a good while.
Okay, so let's talk about where you stayed on the night of the 8th. Do you remember?
Night of the 8th would have either stayed back in Alameda, or that's potentially when we made the transition over to John Marvin's hunting lodge.
Okay. Were you would you say we, or are you including your father?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you drive together?
Yes, sir.
Was he pretty much in your eyesight for the first few days?
Yes, sir.
And so after the 8th, and then you come up on the 9th.
So during this time, I'm noticing a number of manipulators popping up throughout this line of questioning, and I've got to be very frank, I'm having difficulty being able to pull anything out that might align with desynchronization, authenticity, or anything along those lines. It all seems to be fairly synchronized, but then there are areas where he's doing things like this and having manipulators to the inside of his mouth, and all of these are fascinating points, but they don't seem to be lining up with anything that's verbally happening, especially considering the context of everything else that we've seen. So this part, even though we've been sitting here watching through this, I haven't found anything that seems to be sticking out to me in an irregular way. Let's just keep watching.
Do you know whether you were at Alameda or spending the night at your Uncle John Marvin's place?
Yeah, I think at that point we had switched over to his place over at Greenfield.
Now, and you call it Greenfield, that's the name of his hunting
Yes, sir. Just the name of the property overall.
property. Now, how far is it from Alameda?
To Greenfield?
Yeah.
A couple minutes. I mean, not
Close
very.
by. Close
Yeah, right down the road.
And I'm still finding it fascinating how many facial manipulators we're seeing here from Buster, and it has increased in this portion of the line of questioning here, centered around where people were on which days and the activities around that. So trying to think about where all of these massive sort of facial manipulators that he's bringing in here might be stemming from. Obviously, it's a sign of agitation. That's what we're seeing. But what could be causing that agitation is where this is curious. So far, we've seen agitation and red flags pop up around this idea of the clothing that Buster and Alec did, that clothing situation, and now we're seeing it about this where people were at what time situation. Two different areas, two different series of nonverbal spikes that pop up. This is fascinating information. Let's keep watching.
And then, and do you remember how long you stayed at Greenfield with your dad?
Yeah, I mean, several days. And, I think anywhere from the 9th to the, probably that rest of that week through that weekend.
Again, we're having an interesting situation here of Buster remembering specific details fairly well and then other seemingly important details fairly loosely. It's convenient that he has such a selective memory with what he can and can't remember. And all of it seems to be everything that he can remember clearly is centered around possibly clearing his father, but everything that he can't remember clearly is centered around possibly implicating his father. So that is a fascinating relation, but that I'm seeing here. And then what I'm also seeing is when he starts off the beginning of this answer, he starts with the yeah with a itty bitty micro shake no, which lets us know that even though there is a level of he's saying something affirmative, non-verbally he's gonna disagree with that on some level. And now we're getting to it to where he doesn't know the exact times to where people stayed here and there and whatnot again. So we're seeing this pop up. We're seeing kind of how Buster's nonverbal communication goes. Alec during this time has been astutely watching. Occasionally he'll have a facial manipulator. I haven't seen anything from him that has been able to even add some context to what Buster's saying. Perhaps levels of relief could be flashed. Anything, any sort of leakage from Alec would be appreciated in this area, but right now he's staying fairly blank on that front. So let's keep watching this.
Yeah, on Thursday, June 10th, what happened?
Grandfather died.
So the family was together and stayed together?
Yes, sir.
Do you ever remember your dad disappearing for any periods of time?
No, sir.
Were you physically close to him most all the time?
Yes, sir.
Except when you were sleeping?
That's right.
Hey, so this is hard to ignore. During this time, we're seeing now manipulators come out from both Alec and Buster, and that's an interesting thing in and of itself to see these signs of agitation bubbling up from both father and son. Now that to me is a larger red flag when we're seeing it suddenly crop up, especially when it's suddenly cropping up from Alec as well. So these two sides of the agitation popping up around this, were you nearby your dad? Were you close to your dad physically? You would have been able to always see your dad except for when you were asleep. Somewhere in that vein of questioning, it caused both Alec and Buster a lot of anxiety and agitation. So curious to make note of. Let's continue.
And I believe the funeral for your mom and brother memorial service was on that Saturday?
Yes, sir.
Right. And then that Sunday was a funeral for your father? Grandfather,
yes, sir.
And at some point in time you went to... Did you go to Somerville at some point in time?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember when you went to Somerville?
Right, beginning of that next week.
Okay. I'm going to show you what I've marked as Defendant's Exhibit 129 and ask you.
So during that recollection of where he went as comparison to everything else that he was showing, I still saw him look in the same area. There was that shake no in there, but that one could have been large enough and seemed to be perhaps large enough to be intentionally controlled, which would still, even if it wasn't, relate to the I don't know, I'm not sure, which the answer he gave was rather unconfident as well. So just let's keep watching.
We discussed previously, we are objecting on the hearsay basis to 129.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm not introducing 129, offering it to the witness to refresh his recollection. That's the step.
All right.
But it's for ID. Buster, I don't want you to publish that, but I want you to, I want to ask you that Defendant's Exhibit 129, marked for identification purposes, refreshes your recollection as to when you left to go to Somerville.
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury what is that? What's that document you have in your hand?
It's a text thread between my girlfriend and I.
And does it have, so based on that text communication between you and your girlfriend. It refreshes your recollection. When did you leave to go to Somerville?
June 14th.
And looking through there, refreshing your recollection.
So I want to go ahead and pause here and make note of a difference between Buster's nonverbal communication answering now as opposed to when he did earlier. You can hear the force and projection behind his words, which makes sense. He's quite confident on this answer, so it's going to reflect nonverbally. And along with that, he has an affirmative head nod, yes, in there as well. So that's what we know he does when he's speaking confidently about a matter that is genuine, as shown by perhaps physical evidence here. So then that does still let us know that on these earlier times that we saw where it feels less sincere, or it feels like he doesn't have that confidence in what he's saying, it lets us know that we're somewhat on the right track with that. So let's keep watching.
Through there, refreshing your recollection. How long did you stay in Somerville?
Stayed in Somerville until the 17th.
And then what do you remember doing after you left Somerville?
On the 17th, we left Somerville to go to Lake Huey.
And so when you were in Somerville from the 14th to the 17th, who were you staying with?
Staying with my grandparents.
And then
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause there. And so at the very end there again, staying with my grandparent, I didn't see any micro shakes, no in there. I will note that his pitch and tone fell off a fair bit, but that also still fits in with his pattern that he has. He has answered many questions with that specific intonation there at the end. So, okay, the things that I noticed throughout this, there were a number of things. Alec did maintain a fairly astutely blank expression, except for the areas that have felt like perhaps a forced level of emotion, and these areas that you might expect an emotion to come out. And if that's the case, then it could have been levels of manipulation. What I found fascinating from Buster during this entire time is the absolute lack of emotion, even when regarding some fairly traumatic events and even just sad instances that he would have had to attend, like funerals, things like that. So we're seeing this lack of emotion from Buster. Along with that, he regularly had checked in with Alec, and whether or not that's to see how his words are affecting or to see if he's doing well, something along those lines. It was difficult to say. There was that area of a large spike in both of their nonverbal communications, which let me know it was a pretty substantial red flag centered around some of the timing of things. And then we know that Buster had some interesting tells and whatnot around areas with the clothing and exact timings and spacings of where people were on what days and so on and so forth. So these are all the things that we were able to gather from this. Things are seeming to gently nudge me towards the direction of Buster being an accomplice on some level, perhaps to Alec, or at least being in the know. But still, so far from what I've been able to unearth, there's not enough to say, oh, absolutely, he's guilty, he knows everything, he was, in fact, did some of it, that level of things. I'm not able to get to that point yet. But it does seem a little bit suspicious to me, so it would be something that we would have to continue digging into to be able to find out, especially as more evidence comes into light. And then also in regards to the reopening of the case that involves Buster, I'm sure that more things will start to come to light in regards to that. So let me know in the comments of this video if you would like to be able to see more. You can go ahead and hit the like button if you haven't already, hit subscribe, do all those things. I have a merch shop, you should go check it out. It's in there's a Linktree link, and it's got everything linked, including like the socials, which is where you could reach out to me if you want to be able to do that. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for today. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome, as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.